Greetings, YouTube. Today I'll be talking about Steve McQueen by Mark Elliott, a biography. New York Times bestselling author of American Rebel. I'd never heard of Mark Elliott before, but I've been a fan of Steve McQueen as far as an actor is concerned for a long time. I know a lot of people would say Marlon Brando or James Dean, maybe even Elvis Presley, are the definition of cool. But for me, the epitome of cool was always Steve McQueen. There's something effortless about the way he moved and the way he conveyed himself on screen that just screamed cool. Which is partly explained with the fact that he was one of the early adopters in America of the method acting, method acting, method acting. So he really threw himself into a role and tried to become that character, trying to relay his own life experiences into the character, and to the point where he kind of ceased being Steve McQueen and became the character itself. He would often, or a number of times, would wear the costume repeatedly, all the time, just so he could feel the skin of the character that he was supposed to be. Interestingly, he was also somewhat of a fashionista. I didn't imagine that, but when he was in his younger years, he really was into high fashion, and he owned quite a few bespoke suits, which is kind of interesting. I would love to own one myself, but they're hideously expensive. Not to mention, I don't really have anywhere to wear one. Now, the book is interesting in that it opens with an introduction, fairly common to do. Most books I read on nonfiction, or many books I read on nonfiction, have an introduction. Now, the author took an unusual tack in the introduction, in that he essentially holds Steve McQueen in utter contempt throughout the entire introduction. I mean, literally, I'm reading the book like I had to check to make sure I was not actually reading some scathing critique of this actor in comparison to someone else, because he kept speaking of him very contemptuously and speaking glowingly of Clint Eastwood. I mean, through the entire introduction. And I found out, I read the blurb in the back about the author, he's actually written a book about Clint Eastwood. I bet it's glowing. And so I'm like, at the end of the introduction, I'm like, well, this is a very strange way to start a book about Steve McQueen. A biography, not some expose, but a biography. So I kept forging ahead, and I got to the actual book itself, and the first paragraph did not help. Because the first paragraph, the author slut-shames Steve McQueen's mother for having been a prostitute. So I'm like, you got 2 strikes against your brother. That introduction was not great, and now you're doing this. Well, I'm going to keep going. Maybe. We'll see. I'm glad I did. Because the author does an excellent job of presenting Steve McQueen to me, the reader. And I really enjoyed the book beyond those 2 strikes that it started with. Maybe he needed to get those out of his system before he could forge ahead. I'm not sure. He does repeatedly compare the subject of the book to Clint Eastwood throughout the book, however. He continues to do that. I thought that was still strange. Clint Eastwood is a really wonderful human being compared in the eyes of this author. Of course, this was written before he started talking to Cheers. But Steve McQueen was an interesting man. Now, he was cool, and his history of how he was made and how he came to feel that sense of connection to the era of the Beat generation, and the way he brought his physicality to the roles he played was interesting. His time as a youth in a broken family and incredibly tumultuous upbringing with very unstable life experiences when he was a kid, joining the Marines and his experiences there, and then he gets out of the Marines like a week before his unit was sent off to the Korean conflict, and most of them were killed. Kind of interesting. His bouncing across the nation, he wasn't a beatnik, but his vagabond life he led in so many ways. And he was a very physical man. And he reveled in the fact that he was young and beautiful, and many, many women were willing to bed him. Which isn't I mean, we all had our wild youth. That's not a problem. However, it was once that he finally found someone, Neely, a woman that he fell hopelessly in love with the first time he saw her, uh, became his first wife, that I began to really hold Steve McQueen in contempt, maybe as much as the author did in that introduction. Because Steve McQueen was a serial adulterer. Now, I've played that game. I know that game. All right? So I'm not speaking from a high horse. And if it happens once in a relationship, okay, we all have mistakes. Steve McQueen didn't sleep with someone outside his marriage once. It wouldn't shock me if over the course of his life he slept with 1,000 women outside of his marriage. All 3 of his marriages. And he didn't hide them from anyone. He flaunted them. It was a test of loyalty to his wife. That if she didn't leave, even though she knew he was out there sleeping with blondes on a regular basis. He had a penchant for that, apparently. She was the love of his life. She wouldn't leave. And I kept reading the book and realized that there were times when he was extremely unprofessional. When his acting got in the way of productions, and if the things weren't focused on him enough, he acted like a spoiled child. And because of this, he also made some very bad business decisions over the course of his life. He lost a whole lot of money. So his own ego getting in the way. He passed up a number of big roles. He passed up Dirty Harry. Now, I'm not saying he could have pulled off Dirty Harry. I think maybe I don't know if I could imagine Dirty Harry as anyone other than Clint Eastwood. But he passed up roles like this again and again and again because he didn't think they were perfect for Steve McQueen. When I think he had the acting chops to pull it off. Because frankly, I think Steve McQueen is probably a better actor than Clint Eastwood in many ways. Clint Eastwood is maybe a better presence in some regards. But in his later years, as the first marriage began to deteriorate, it got worse. He beat his wife. He held a pistol to her head. His drug use made his acting in his marriage even more difficult. In short, I almost wish I hadn't read the book, but I'm glad I did read the book. He was married 3 times, and the last marriage was only a few months before he died, because he wanted to make sure that the woman he loved at that time in his life was taken care of, financially and such, because of she being his wife, she'd get very little contest to the estate. He had 2 kids, and I think he did the best he could with them. I don't think he knew how to be a good parent in many ways, because he didn't have any examples to go by, and I can understand that as well. But he didn't treat the people in his life well, didn't treat the women in his life well. But there's an extremely fitting comment at the end of the book, and his first wife, Neely, was at the memorial service after they had cremated him. His ashes had been scattered over the Pacific. And she stood there at this little podium to speak to the assembled guests. And she looked at the room and she said, "Steve liked to fuck blondes, but he married brunettes." And the room was silent for a moment. And then everyone burst out laughing. And that was kind of perfect.